If you have ever worked in a technical team, maybe in an environment that's highly volatile, highly innovative, you have probably experienced your fair share of tension, maybe disagreements, maybe conflicts. It's part of what we do. We, as humans, have natural tensions in such environments. And especially when we look towards agile models and frameworks, there are a lot of things that already help us address these things. Nevertheless, there is a level of what happens if it goes beyond what we have as a tool set and beyond of what we can address. And this is where mediation comes in. In this overview, I will give you an understanding of mediation, what mediation is used for, and how it can be leveraged for folks in tech to address conflicts and to ultimately have a well-working, well-functioning team and good relationships within that team. So let's look into what is mediation actually. Mediation is a process whereby conflict parties resolve their conflict by following a structured, participative, and moderated process. The mediator supports all parties with a multi-partial approach. Mediation is highly communicative. It involves both or all parties on an eye level and ensures fairness through multi-partiality. What do I mean with multi-partiality? Multi-partiality is a bit like neutrality, but it also goes beyond this concept. When we look towards neutrality, we always assume that there is sort of this party that is apart from the actual process, that is sort of a bit detached. This is not the case for mediation. Mediation is a process where the mediator, in the role of a moderator, is fully immersed in the process and is part of the process. Therefore, neutrality cannot be achieved naturally. There is a level of participation of the mediator. But the participation is not in the sense that the mediator adds any perspectives of their own, any insights, any experiences. It's purely a moderative role. Nevertheless, the mediator has to have the mandate to speak for all parties in this process. This is very important when we look towards a situation where, for example, one person in the process is not speaking up a lot and the other person is speaking up a lot. Then the mediator needs to have that mandate to enable the other person to speak, to enable both sides to be represented. And this is where multi-partiality, a speaking for all parties in the process, comes in. So this is one of the cornerstones of mediation, and it's very important. And it goes away in a sense of what we experience in retrospectives, right? In a retrospective, or even just in a, let's say, a traditional sitting down of people and somebody's moderating, there's always this feeling of I have to be neutral. As humans, we try to be as neutral as we can be, but it's important that we also feel that we have the mandate to enable a balanced hearing of all parties. Not every person can be a mediator. There are regulations to it, whereas you will have a lot of examples where there are agile coaches that do a training and then they are certified by, let's say, an independent provider. This is not the case for mediation. Mediation actually has a legal stamp on it. And what you need to do is, at least in Germany, these are the German frameworks, you need to have a training of 120 hours. And then you can call yourself already a mediator. You can even do that with, let's say, 8 hours of training. It is possible. You do a weekend and then you can call yourself a mediator. But this is not sort of legally protected, the terminology. What is legally protected, however, is the designation of certified mediator. And for this, you need to have those 120 hours of training. And what do those 120 hours of training encompass? They include all of the steps that are delineated in the German law that is being derived from European law, where it basically states that you, for example, need to look into methods of communication, you need to have practical training and so forth. So there is a catalog that all the providers that offer training on this can veer and navigate within. And then to be certified, you need to have at least one supervised mediation following this training, and you need to do 4 more within the following 2 years, starting from the end of your training, so that you can keep this level, this designation, this label of being a certified mediator. On top of that, you're required to do 10 hours of training every year in the realm of conflict management. So this is very important that you have that as a mediator. This is where we have the distinction between what is a conflict resolver and a mediator. A conflict resolver that is a loosely defined terminology. Those are usually trained moderators, but in essence, they don't have, let's say, that legal framework that mediation gives you. Mediation is defined by the law. In Germany, that's the Mediationsgesetz, and there is also a distinct addition to that that defines the training catalog. Or you could call it an add-on. And again, we have the distinction between what is a trained moderator and what is a trained mediator. And mediators specifically are trained on situations of conflict within the setting of a conflict resolution process. So why does it make sense for tech folks to leverage mediation, right? We are in an environment of high-level innovation. Often, we are in situations of high volatility. This can lead to tension. There is a big distinction between sort of going through your daily business and just doing your thing and not having any high expectations. Whenever I look around in tech, it is fraught with high expectations. It is fraught with pressure, with deadlines, and so forth. Delivery teams are encouraged to think innovatively, to think outside of the box. A lot of money goes into training people, into upskilling people, into making sure that they can deliver what is expected of them. And this again can lead to a high level of tension, which you might not encounter in other environments. What I definitely include here are very high volatile environments, like for example, hospitals. Obviously, this is a different level still. But when we look towards tech, there are a lot of expectations to be met. And this can lead to high pressure on people, and this ultimately can manifest in disagreements and conflicts that arise within teams, in between teams, in the organization generally. Retrospectives are not enough sometimes. What sounds like a Bond movie is in essence something that I have observed many times over. I have been part of amazing retrospectives, don't get me wrong. A lot of the other times I have seen that retrospectives do not deliver what they are set out to do. Why is that the case? It's what we have seen, or what I have seen a lot, is that, especially also in the literature, there is sort of this level of, if the team has retrospectives, or if the project team, the development team has retrospectives, then this ensures that they can talk everything out and everything will be fine. They will take measures following that. They will have action items coming out of the retrospective. And that is all true. I'm not disputing that fact. It is, however, it is often the case, however, that we get together after sprint, collect all of the new items, even when we look towards the old items and check off if we have fulfilled them. There's still this level of, there is this continuous sprinty feeling of, let's come up with new points. And often when we look towards how much time do we have in a retrospective, it does not give us enough time to go to that deep level of where the conflict actually sits. And what I've also observed, which is often something that should not be done, is that it's very functionally oriented. So the team talks about, we need to make sure that our pipeline works better here, or we need to make sure that front end and back end work better together, and so forth, which is very functional in essence. But the real conflicts often do not come from the functional. They come from the professional or the human side of things. And do we give it this room? I haven't seen a lot of evidence for that. I've tried to encourage it, obviously, but again, is a retrospective of half an hour, 1.5 hours every 2-3 weeks, every week if you have very short sprints, is it enough to have room for the conflicts in between single parties within the team, the conflicts that are happening in the whole team? Sometimes not. Again, for the sort of the higher level meta things, the functional things, it's a perfect environment, it's a perfect platform. But when let's put it that way, when the shit really hits the fan, then it could be challenging to do that in a retrospective, and then a mediation could make more sense. What we've also seen in agility is that the agile mindset values honesty and removing hurdles, right? And this is essentially what mediation is all about. It's about being honest and open with each other, showing that vulnerability, and about removing those hurdles that we see in a communicative process. So it actually, mediation underlines what agility is trying to achieve. What I also haven't seen, and I might be wrong, please correct me if I am, that in all of the agile frameworks, SAFe comes to mind, sort of from the bigger, the larger frameworks, that often the topic of inter-team conflicts is not addressed. Oftentimes when you sort of put together a higher level team that's composed of members of other teams, and then you have sort of a project or development team, and you have a retrospective there, that might address it partially, but what happens if two teams collaborate very closely, one person feels that there is something in the room, the other person in the other team feels like that too. There is maybe a retrospective from the two teams that they do together, but they cannot address their individual conflict. So I haven't really seen it a lot. Again, please correct me if I'm wrong. I will be very happy to be corrected. However, I see that mediation can oftentimes support even better between teams than necessarily within one team where people already talk a lot with each other. Mediation has a specific structure that it follows. It is very flexible, that is the case. However, you have various sort of principles and phases that you follow up on, and that are the cornerstones of what mediation is all about. First off, mediation consists of a phase workshop. That means that you have various phases that you follow along in the process, and you can go back and forth if necessary, so that's possible. But what you do is you make sure that you have sort of a sequence there. Mediation is also very strong on weighted hearing and active listening. What do I mean by that? Weighted hearing means that I hear from all participants in a balanced way. All of the participants are encouraged to share their insights, their experiences, their feelings, their needs. And I do that by actively listening, paraphrasing what they are saying, but also making sure that there is not one voice that dominates the conversation, and then there is another voice that is just held back. So I want to hear from all participants as a mediator for them, so that they can listen to each other and find the solution together. And as I already mentioned, there is a strong focus on needs and solutions. So it's not about, again, the functional aspect. We're not talking about your code was like this or your code was like that, and this is what you should do better. This is for the functional coaching part. What we want to talk about is, why do you feel that the code should be better? We want to talk about, why do you need to have that space to express yourself? What are your underlying feelings and needs? And it's also highly solution oriented, which means that, again, it's not about what the mediator says, it's not about what the manager says, it's not about what the CTO says, it's about what the participants feel is the best approach for them, and they can creatively and collaboratively work on that together. Mediation consists of 4 phases. The first phase is the intro, or the SAFe framework phase, which means that we go into the exchange and we make sure that we don't go into it with, let's say, a gap in understanding of what we expect from another. On the contrary, we define what our expectations, what the rules for the exchange are. Most often you will hear things like, I want to be listened to, I want to have the space to talk about what I need to talk about, I don't want to be interrupted, I want to make sure that nobody's looking at their cell phone while we are in this process, something like that, right? So the basic rules of engagement and respect. Oftentimes, mediators go into a process and suggest a selection of rules that could be applicable to the scenario. In other situations, it's completely defined by the group or by the 2 parties that are in the mediation, and the mediator essentially just writes them down. However, you arrive at the end destination, it's important that everybody in the process is comfortable with the rules and embraces them. And the mediator does this by checking in with the people that are in the process. The second phase is the topic or topics phase. This is where people can just let loose. This is where they are encouraged to share what is on their mind, what the problem, or in their perspective, problem is, what they feel like should be addressed. So this is oftentimes the phase where, as a mediator, I see that there's sort of this floodgate open and people just talk. And it can be a little bit accusatory at times, but again, as a mediator, my role is to make sure that there is respectful communication and that all of the parties in the process can give the other party the space to listen to, that they listen to them, but that they also have the opportunity to say what is on their mind themselves. In this phase, no solutions are being addressed, no suggestions are being made. Sometimes I have to hold back people a little bit because they're over enthusiastic. They go in and they feel like, oh, there is this problem, but I already have the solution. Here, let's do this. This is not how it works. It's just about what are we actually looking at in this process. Let's define what we have. And ideally, you exit this phase with a list of topics or an understanding of the topic, a definition of the topic. You can do this visually by using a whiteboard, or now that we are in remote setting, you can use a digital board like Miro or Mural, and you can make sure that this is a visual representation of the topics. And then we go over to phase 3, which is all about the needs and wishes. Normally, you would take one topic out of that phase 2 and then discuss it more in detail. And this is where we focus on the underlying feelings that a person had, the needs that this person has, and how they are looking at the scenario, and what they would wish the other person to do. So it's about the needs of one party and what they need from the other party, and vice versa. And in this phase, this is often the most heated phase, let's say, because this is where people are allowed to share their feelings and thoughts on the matter. They are encouraged to quote examples, to make sure that they visualize also if necessary. There are a lot of models in mediation that enable taking different perspectives. And because it is so heated, but that's actually the good part, because this is where we unearth the overlaps and the understanding of each other of, oh, I never knew this, that you thought this, or I never knew that you had this experience. And oh, now I see where you're coming from. So this is often the phase of the breakthroughs. And again, you would exit it with ideally a list of wishes and expectations that one party has to the other party. And then you can go to the 4th phase, which is the solutions phase. And this is often where people feel very happy. They have had the opportunity to vent, to let sort of the emotions go, and they seem more relaxed. People are smiling. Usually these are the indicators that we have arrived in the solutions phase. Often also in the phase 3, you will hear first suggestions come up, right? So we go to the phase 4, and this is where the creativity can be let loose. So here people are encouraged to draw, to make lists, to map stuff out, and to do it collaboratively again. So this is more like the workshop phase than any other phase in mediation. And ideally, you would do this with one topic, and then you go back to phase 2, 3, 4, or just to phase 3 and then repeat phase 4. Sometimes it depends, but again, it's a flexible process, so you can design and map it out however it is best for the participants in this process. The solutions phase ends with a written down agreement. So solutions that have been put forward, you have done the check-in with all of the participants. They are happy with it. They will have a list and they will sign that list as an indicator that they agree to it and that they will follow up on the action items listed on this list or the map or whatever you drew up. The mediator does not sign because, again, it's an agreement between the participants. The mediator only unearths the potential that is in the participants to solve the conflict. There are a range of benefits to mediation. Confidentiality is a big thing, so nothing that is being said leaves the room unless the participants wish it so. There's a high level of control. You can, as a mediator, again, you have the mandate to have somebody speak, to tell the other person, no, I want to hear the first party first. So you have a lot of control in how you design the process. It's also compliant with a lot of HR processes in various countries and various definitions, so it does not violate any of those processes, but again, it complements them. Cost is a big factor as well. It is, yes, it does cost something to engage an external mediator. Maybe there are also internal mediators to be had in an engineering organization. In any case, what is important is that it costs less than if you had to go to the courts, for example. Oftentimes, specifically when we look at very high level conflicts about innovative content, you might end up in a situation where somebody might want to sue. So mediation can be a good method to avoid that. And it also ultimately reduces the conflict, because if you don't have to sue someone, then there is less of a conflict. It's voluntary. Nobody can be forced to be in a mediation, and nobody should be forced to be in a mediation. What I often experience is that people are a little bit shy, a bit hesitant about, should I do it? What is expected of me? Why should I be in this process? Then I have a preliminary talk with them as a mediator and just detail to them what I detail to you in this presentation, which is, this is how it looks like, this is what mediation is all about. However, if they say, no, that's not for me, it's absolutely within their rights to not participate, to not engage. And they also can step out at any time in the process. Nobody, again, is forced to be in a mediation. It's also a flexible process. As I mentioned various times, you can design it according to your specifications. You can also take bits and pieces of mediation out of it and employ it in other settings. This is a bit tricky because to offer mediation, you need to be able to call yourself a mediator. So if you do, let's say, conflict resolution with core elements of mediation, but you haven't had mediation training, that can be a bit tricky, but in essence, you can adapt and you can merge it with a lot of other processes that are out there. You exit the mediation with a mediation agreement, so you have something that's written down, that's binding for the parties, and that's also binding in legal situations, for example. Assuming that the participants are happy to share it with the outside world or with whoever needs to have a look at that in legal processes, then it's a binding agreement. It's legally valid. Yeah. It's an open-ended process. Again, nobody can be forced to be in a mediation, but there's also no expectation that there will definitely be a solution. What we do see is that mediation is many times more effective than other processes. I think the latest stats that I have in my head about it's 80% of mediations are successful, which is a very, very high level in comparison to when you go to the court and somebody else needs to decide for you. How happy will you be with that decision, right? But in essence, you cannot expect people to go in and then you will definitely have a solution. So for example, let's say you're an engineering manager, you have two people in your teams that quarrel, you want to address this, you book an external mediator, they come in, they have the process, they maybe have 3, 4, 5 sittings, and they realize, no, we cannot find a solution. We have tried it, but in essence, it doesn't work. Then sometimes it's also good to have that insight from the process, which is we have tried it, but we don't have a resolution. And let's think about what can be the next steps with that setting. And yeah, so there's a range of benefits to mediation, and it's definitely preferable to other processes and other aspects that we would have in conflict scenarios. Oftentimes when we think about team collaboration, we think about the functional aspects. Think about all of the job ads that are out there where it says that you have to have qualifications in A, B, C, D, right? Level of JavaScript, level of knowledge about CI/CD pipelines, knowledge about, yeah, it's still around PHP. But in essence, this is what we're looking at in job ads. It's always about, how good are you functionally? Some job ads take into consideration you should be a team player, you should be collaborative, because in essence, delivery teams and technical teams, when we look at the wider sense, they are highly collaborative. You work with people all day, every day. Yes, you will have your 4 hours of coding focus time, but in essence, you do a lot of pair programming as well. You do a lot of concepting together. You do refinements. You work together with the PO. It's so collaborative. So just writing team player, it sometimes might not be sort of, how do we define what a team player is? In essence, mediation gives a lot of hints of what is good to have as an attribute to be able to be in a team collaboratively and to work collaboratively. Let's dive into that. To be able to work collaboratively, to listen well to each other, to take others' needs into consideration, mediation, first of all, asks you, what conflict type are you? There are many, many models out there. You can Google them all. But in essence, oftentimes there's distinction between avoiding and confrontative. So the better you know yourself, the better you know your own emotional landscape of how you deal with conflict, the better you can then tackle a conflict, because you consciously know how you would react and what your impulses are. Also important is, how do I hear? How do I perceive messages? How do I comprehend messages? For that, for example, we have the 4E or 4 sides model. So when somebody tells me your code wasn't good, what do I hear? Do I just hear, okay, my code wasn't good, or do I hear, oh, your code wasn't good, you have to get better? Or do I hear, your code wasn't good, maybe we should work more and collaborate more so I can show you the ropes? So there are various ways of how to understand and perceive a message, how to digest it, if you will. Another aspect in mediation is talking about emotions. How often have you experienced technical teams to talk about emotions? It does come up in the retrospective, yes. In essence, things like nonviolent communication, or making sure that I understand what is going on with me and I can express it to the outside world. I haven't yet seen that a lot in the business/tech context, but it is so imperative to talk about your own emotions, what you feel in that scenario, and not doing it accusatorily. So not, I am disappointed because you did something wrong, but more like, I feel sad currently, or I feel this and that way because something happened. It is so imperative to have that. In the same vein, we look at wishes and needs. Most conflicts, the vast majority of conflicts, comes out of a scenario where there are suppressed needs, unfulfilled needs, if you will. And this can be easily remedied. Oftentimes, okay, I might not be able to fulfill somebody's need, but at least I can hear about it and I can think about whether I can fulfill it. Oftentimes the need is to be heard, to be seen, to be maybe even acknowledged for what you did, right? Maybe that person has evolved strongly in writing clean code and the other people haven't seen it, so they're frustrated, and that's what leads to a conflict. This is where expressing your wishes and needs come in. And in this area, there are a lot of lists out there that definitely that give us an overview of what are actual needs, how can I express them. So this is very useful, very handy. Sometimes can help people that might be that might need sort of this language to express themselves, to have sort of that little support there. So again, looking at models and frameworks that come out of the realm of mediation already helps us to collaborate better in the team. Mediation provides a lot of models and frameworks to address conflict. And you can use them within mediation, but you can also use them outside of the setting of mediation. I'm not going to delve into what those methods are in detail, because again, they can be Googled, the information is out there. I might be able to do another talk on some of these things, but in essence, there are some techniques that are useful in any conflict situation, and they are, for example, conflict analysis. So I can look at, what is the conflict actually? Is it a hot conflict? Is it a cold conflict? Cold conflicts, for example, are manifested in that people don't speak to each other anymore, which often can be the case. There are a lot of other ways to distinguish between different kinds of conflict, but to understand what is actually going on, what we are looking at, very beneficial. Then there's active listening, the magic tool of communication and conflict resolution that's out there. Active listening is amazing. It helps to understand the other person better. It helps to communicate better between two or more parties. And it makes sure that I have an open ear and an open mind for the other person. And I can also encourage other people to do the same. Paraphrasing is also an amazing tool. It is actually part of active listening. And there are many ways you can paraphrase. You can paraphrase word by word, just to indicate, okay, I have understood what you were saying, or I have processed it. But you can also paraphrase drastifyingly, so you can sort of make a situation a bit more drastic to elicit a response. But what is even more magical is positive paraphrasing, where I look into how can I rephrase something with a positive twist to it, right? And there are many examples. Again, I'm not going to delve into them. I might do another video on this, but in essence, it's magical. It unlocks so much potential, and it makes sure that the other person sees that you have built a bridge to them. Constructivism is also a very important concept. It's basically this approach that nobody has the same reality as the other person. We all have different realities and experiences, and we all with that have different ways of viewing the world, which does not mean that one is less valid than the other. It's just different. And understanding that one person might look at something differently than me already is a big icebreaker, big tool to understand better what is going on in the other person. And a good example is, in a way, it's coding, because sometimes you can arrive at the same destination with different ways of coding things. They are still valid, right? So maybe one person prefers this way, the other person prefers that way, but you can still arrive at the same end goal. And sometimes it's also interchangeable. Then there are methodologies that go deeper into how we can improve communication. Nonviolent communication is one of those. It's one of the models where I have a step-by-step model, which then gives me an understanding of how I can split my message up into making sure that I communicate my observations, my interests, needs, wishes, my emotions that I have, and then ultimately to utter a request to the other person, an ask, if you will. And it's very similar, very akin to feedback models that are out there. And it unlocks, again, a lot of potential for communication within the setting of a mediation, but also communication within the team setting. Another model is the Harvard negotiation model, which in essence, if I break it down to the core part, is moving away from strong positions, which can be technical positions, right? I have this approach, you have that approach, and again, looking more towards the underlying interests, needs, wishes that are behind those positions, and then working with those instead of the strong positions. And there are many more techniques that are out there that are employed in mediation that work really well with technical teams. But this would go beyond this presentation, this video, this context, but happy to elaborate more in one-on-one settings and making sure that we have an understanding of what can be done. But yeah, many more things to be had. And this is just a very small, very compressed selection of things that can be done. This was my introduction to mediation. Of course, there are some questions that you might have in your head. And because I kind of anticipated that there might be questions, I have added an FAQ section. So we'll answer a couple of questions that have come up mostly in the talks that I gave on this topic, and wrap up the most important answers there for you in this next segment. So I'm often asked, have you done mediation in teams before? Yes, I have, and specifically in technical teams. And it's a thrilling ride every single time. I'm always really happy when I can help and support teams on their journey, be that sort of in the larger setting, but also within individuals. And it's a particular joy for me to be able to support technical teams in making great products with the collaboration that they have. When should a team seek help? Oh, that's a good question. It's oftentimes we assume that a team or individuals that have a conflict with each other should seek help when it's already escalating, right? When it's already at a level where people either don't talk to each other anymore or they fight all the time. And this is probably the latest point when you should seek help. Ideally, you seek help very early on in the when you sense that there is a disagreement or conflict, because what you can do is people are still in the talking mode with each other. They are still very willing and open. Oftentimes when you start a mediation at sort of the higher level phase of a conflict, what you first need to do is a lot of trust building and a lot of making sure that people are even open for the process, which is a completely separate thing of the actual mediation process. So whenever you feel that there is a conflict going on that goes beyond a disagreement, or it has become a major disagreement, that's the point where mediation makes the most sense. but not exclusively. You can also still obviously do it in the phases where the conflict has actually escalated. Where can you find mediators? There are a lot of websites out there, portals where you can find mediators and just book a person from the portal there. What is much more effective, I have found, is leveraging your own network, specifically when it comes to subject knowledge. In essence, mediators do not need to have subject knowledge to mediate a conflict. As a person mediating conflicts mainly in the tech sector, I can also mediate a family conflict, and I would be happy and able to do that, or vice versa, right? But there are people that prefer to have mediators that have some form of subject knowledge, that have some form of insight, and it can actually help in understanding the context a bit better and making sure that there is a better weighted hearing of participants. So I personally prefer to have somebody who has a specialization in a specific conflict area. So for example, for a tech team, I wouldn't book a family mediator. I would book somebody who has experience in business and in teams, and make sure that this person is knowledgeable, and or I would be able to do it myself if I'm not prohibited from doing that. Does the mediator have to have experience in the tech sector? This goes a little bit into the previous question. It's certainly beneficial. It's not a must, but it can help in understanding all of the people in the process better, and understanding the setting, the scenario that people are in, and to make sure that they also have the bridges and the support to understand each other well, maybe specifically when they come from different viewpoints. In the leadership that I have done, I have led people that are designers, people that are engineers, people that are POs. So I know the various perspectives, and I feel very comfortable in going into scenario and having those various perspectives representing there, and also enabling people to take the other person's perspective with that. So it certainly helps, it's beneficial, and it cannot hurt. Let's put it that way. Do all people need to be in the same room for mediation? Yes and no. Before Corona times, obviously, most mediations took place within one room where all of the participants were part of the process, were present. Nowadays that we are in remote settings, there are a lot of mediations that are being done virtually. I'm a big fan of virtual mediations. I think they work really, really well if you have the right mindset and the right experiences with virtual tools. It's also great because you can employ a digital tooling like Miro and Mural, or even just going to a doc or a presentation like a slide and visually drawing there and sharing that with the participants, a bit like pair programming, right? So it works. However, usually the assumption is that all of the people are in the same virtual or in-person presence room. And it's very beneficial to have that, because then you can hear all of the sides on the same point. However, there are exceptions to this, specifically when we are still in the phase of people trying to or when we try to onboard people to the mediation. Oftentimes when the conflict has gotten really severe, people might be like, I don't want to talk to the other person. What is this all about? So what you start out with is a so-called shuttle mediation, and you go back and forth between the participants as the mediator. So you talk to one person, then you summarize what they have said, you go to the person, then you summarize what they have said, and then you go in between. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. It happened in the good old days with telephone mediation a lot. But in essence, this is a variant of mediation. It's often a precursor to the actual mediation where all people are in the room, and it can be employed, and it does make sense in some scenarios. Does it make sense for disagreements too? It does. It does. It's sometimes better to address something head on and talk about it, talk it out, than letting it simmer and boil, and then you will not have a good experience for the participants once the mediation starts, right? So at the soonest opportunity, when you feel like, there is a conflict brewing, something is coming up, it can make sense to engage a mediator or to use mediative techniques. So absolutely, disagreements, it makes sense there too. Are there any restrictions for mediators? Yes, there are, and there are quite a ton of restrictions. For example, I am not allowed to mediate in scenarios where I have previously coached people. I am obviously also a coach, right? And if I have coached beforehand and then I mediate, then I have an unnatural advantage from one person's. I know one person's perspective really well, but I don't know the other person's perspective. This is not good. This should be avoided, and I'm not allowed to do that. There are some restrictions where it's sort of in a gray area, specifically, for example, when I know one person, but I don't know the other person. I haven't coached the one person before, I haven't mediated the one person before. So I would have to disclose this. I know person ABC from beforehand. We are colleagues. We have attended dance class together, whatnot, so that the other person can decide, yes, I'm still comfortable with her doing the mediation, or I'm not comfortable with that. So they have the right to do that. There are also restrictions, for example, when I have mediations that are building up on top of each other. So let's say I have mediated one team on one scenario, and then the team comes to me again with another scenario, perfectly fine. However, if I have part of the team on one scenario, and then I have, let's say, another part of the team joining, but they have already gone through the process, can I ensure that this is fair, that they have the same level of knowledge and insight into this? So there's a lot of there are a lot of things that need to be considered, and there are obviously also legal restrictions in the sense of what am I allowed to disclose from the process. Generally, I'm not allowed to disclose anything. I'm under confidentiality agreement. However, there are some exceptions. For example, if life and limb is threatened, if children are threatened, then I have to alert the authorities. And I have to make sure that obviously, the necessary steps are being taken. Then it's even my obligation. And then there are some cases when things go to court after mediation. Then in some scenarios, I'm allowed to give testimony. In other cases, I'm not allowed to do that. Or I can say I'm refraining from giving testimony. There are some special freedoms, I would say, for people who are mediators and lawyers at the same time, who have a lawyer qualification. They are very special and they only count for that group. Since I'm not a lawyer, they don't apply to me. But yeah, I definitely have to make sure that I do my homework on these kind of things, and I cannot just practice anything and everywhere as how I want to do it, right? So I have this legal framework. What happens if there is no resolution? It can happen, and it does happen. About 20% of the cases end up with no resolution at all. It's still a very low number in comparison to other processes, but you have to be prepared entering the process of mediation that there might not be a resolution at the end, which needs to be accepted. It's just the way it is, but at least you've had the process, and maybe you have had some insights along the way that can then help you going forward with whatever you are dealing with next, or when the same challenge comes up again. But yeah, so it's an open-ended process. This is how it's designed, and in 80% of the cases, there is a resolution, and people leave mediations very happy. So this was the overview on what is mediation and how can we leverage it in tech. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the comments, and to make sure that I'm aware of this and that I can answer that, and maybe bring that up in another video and a follow-up video, maybe even talk a little bit about my mediative practice. Whatever your suggestions are, I will pick that up. Thank you very much for that, and thank you for watching. Do you want to see more videos on all things human in tech? Then subscribe and make sure that you get an alert when the next video is out.